Last Friday, the 15th of February, the early access period for Anthem launched, and with it a resounding singular question came booming from the internet. Is Anthem worth buying? Hi there, my name is Teawrex, and I'll be taking a bit of your time to review my experience with Anthem and hopefully provide some insight for you on whether this game is for you. Before going any further, I'd like to mention specifically there will not be any story spoilers in this video. We are also making this video after they have now officially pushed out the day one patch that fixes a variety of bugs. I'll mention some of those bugs in this video, describing how the game functioned when I first played it. First, let's talk about what I found the game does really well before getting into some of the more frustrating aspects of the experience. Anthem's team-style gameplay from the demo already had me with high hopes for what to expect from the full release. Utilizing the combo system that seems built off of Mass Effect is incredibly satisfying and rewarding. Fighting alongside your friends as you progress through the story is fun, as you want to try all these different combinations of attacks and strategies to quickly demolish your foes. I've played just over 50 hours with Storm, and I am still loving how satisfying it is to freeze, shock, or burn people, and then explode them with lightning to spread the effect around. I loved how much crowd control I had as I floated above the battlefield, keeping tabs on everything else going on. Unfortunately, without playing on a higher difficulty, enemies die pretty quick, and usually the game turns into who can kill things fastest, which can make the game experience turn bland after a while. The flying and gunplay feel a bit tighter than they did during the demo, and are passable in the full game, but they aren't really anything to phone home about. I feel the game focuses more on how your abilities work together instead of how your guns do. Higher level weaponry certainly play a tremendous role in how you coordinate an attack, but they usually complement the rest of your javelin in its kit instead of being the only thing you use. Moving on, let's talk about the writing, animation, and the world they plopped me into. Without spoiling anything from the story, I can at least say that there is one. While the story could be considered satisfactory, I feel it falls short of the legacy of sci-fi stories BioWare became known for. For going into Anthem expecting something to match those, there's a chance you'll be left disappointed as I was. The biggest critique I could have with it was it felt incredibly rushed and the ending was very abrupt. Play till the end, you'll see what I mean. The world of Anthem is full of a pretty colorful cast of scrappy characters that for the most part are well animated and voiced. Owen, for example, is voiced fantastically and his animations really fit his personality. The characters had solid motivations, I enjoyed their dialogue, but it felt like everything happened so fast and I just couldn't get into it. I think one of the reasons I couldn't particularly connect deeply with this game's narrative was that I never got to play alongside any of these NPCs I was supposed to care about. The only part that really stuck with me was at the start of the game, but after that, everything felt underwhelming. There is also a lot of telling in Anthem versus showing, which feels like such a missed opportunity for them. Exposition has a place, but too much of it can feel like a chore. The only place this plays decently well is inside of Fort Tarsis for getting to know the city's folk who wander around day to day. I wasn't the biggest fan of how much extra dialogue was cluttered all around my map, but I'm sure someone out there will really appreciate all of the extra TLC that went into making the city full of people who actually have stories there. While Fort Tarsis is brimming with activity, the gameplay world is, well, not. Lush forest and gorgeous waterfalls offer little of interest as you fly mindlessly across the terrain in search of red dots to appear on your map, or a world event to offer some brief respite. There is almost a deafening silence from the game. Your only company, the gentle roar of your javelin's thrusters, or the occasional wildlife. Adding that to the cap of 4 players per instance leaves the world simply feeling dead. It may be big and beautiful and gorgeous, but for its functional gameplay, it lacks a lot of draw. Honestly, it feels like a waste. So much heart and energy went into building these intricate environments, only to leave the player wondering why they're actually there. Hopefully, as more server-wide events are introduced in the future, they can make better use of this amazing world they've built. This is where things start to get dicey for me. If I had to describe Anthem simply to you, I'd say it is a good game that sometimes feels ruined by bad systems. We'll talk about bugs later, but I'll start with some systemic problems that I feel really hurt the game in the long run. For starters, let's talk about the generic mission experience you face every time you want to venture out into the world. Your quest begins in Fort Tarsus, where you'll limp your way to the forge. Here, you'll encounter a loading screen, after which you can select and customize your javelin. Once that's done, it's another loading screen, and you're off to the mission select screen. After picking your task of choice and assembling your friends, you'll launch the expedition. Another loading screen will appear. Afterwards, you've made it into the world. Now here's where things get really rough. Anthem features a very diverse pool of potential quest objectives, such as hide and go seek, killing a big guy, killing some little guys, defending an area, collecting some balls to give to some spikes, collecting some chunks of metal to give it to a ball, and my personal favorite, desecrating remains. That's every single objective you will possibly encounter in the missions currently in the game. Oh, and once that's done, you don't get to stay in the world. You're taken to another loading screen so you can see your experience and loot totals. After which, you will load again to go back to Fort Tarsus, the Forge, or the Launch Bay, and then you get to do it all over again. The load screens are miserable. Seeing the same tips and images hundreds of times with not a sound or hint of music to distract from them is maddening. It completely slows down the gameplay experience. There were missions where I genuinely spent nearly as much time loading as I did actually playing the game. The menus are just as frustrating. Many of them are slow and unresponsive. The organization of things like consumables is a nightmare to sort through. These items are super helpful on your missions, but it just ends up being a chore to set up every single time you want to go out and do things. So, I usually ended up just not using them up until I felt like I had to. On top of that, the text within most of your gear menus is equally dumbfounding. They use all these terms like 33% support luck with a little person icon next to it, or plus 20% gear speed with a tiny gear symbol. None of this is explained to you as a player. One thing I hope they absolutely add soon is a stat screen to help break down what all of this stuff means. Sure, plenty of it's straightforward like a flat damage increase, but how does luck really help me out in my farming for loot? None of these problems by themselves are that damning, but when you start adding all of them on top of each other, it starts to grate on you. It's like having an amazing, delicious cake in front of you, but it's covered in just the finest amount of sand that you didn't really notice until you started eating it. Now let's talk about progression. As you progress through the story, enemies don't really get that much more difficult to dispatch. But once you reach level 30, you unlock what is called the Grand Master difficulty setting, which I'll be referring later to as GM 1, 2, and 3. Everything in this mode is designed to kill you incredibly fast until the game graciously awards you with a masterworked or legendary component that's going to beef up your shield and health a bit. Combat goes from being really, really fun to you being turned into Swiss cheese by even the smallest enemies on higher difficulties. So, you have to grin and bear it as enemies that take and deal more than twice as much damage as before start running shop on you. The rewards themselves, though, also get a healthy boost in drop rate. Fighting enemies on this difficulty made me feel weak and powerless until I had a few masterwork gear pieces that I randomly acquired through farming out pieces of the game on hard mode. Unfortunately, there really isn't any other choice for you. The progression here goes from small steps to an exponential leap. On my storm, getting one of these pieces was as much of a defense boost as all of my other pieces combined. The inclusion of a health gate mechanic is a welcome barrier against the onslaught of damage present throughout Grandmaster. And even then, a second stray round is more than enough to take you out of the fight yet again. No smaller steps, just one giant punch in the face until my jaw became steel. The big problem I have with the system, aside from it being very unapproachable to someone without patience, is that there is no difference between the best gear you get in GM1 and GM3. The best gear in the game is legendary and masterworked gear. You don't get better versions of this gear on higher difficulties, you just have a higher chance of it. Up until a couple days ago, the most effective gearing strategy wasn't to even enter missions or strongholds. Instead, you hunted loot boxes in the open world hoping for a masterwork or legendary drop on GM3. To approach harder content, you're forced to play a loot lottery with no real rhyme or reason behind what you get out of it, since everything is random, even what masterworks you get. And even if you win the lottery, your power level gets higher and the numbers get bigger, but you still fight the same bosses you did on hard, and they still die exactly the same way. The reality is that constantly running the same content with just damage and health scaling changes isn't engaging or fun. It's a chore. The gameplay is absolutely fun, but not good enough to let most people ignore the repetition behind it for very long. While the endgame grind will offer hardcore lovers of the game something to do for a long time, I feel it will cause plenty to put it down and wait for a new update with new things to do. The last thing I want to talk about with the gameplay experience is the amount of bugs present when I first started playing the full game on February 15th. Frequently throughout my gameplay experience, myself and my friends would randomly lose audio and be forced to restart the game entirely to fix it. Sometimes the game wouldn't even let you choose when you wanted to restart and would randomly kick you back to the main menu mid-mission or in Tarsus with an "insert random error here" message. You know those difficult enemies I mentioned earlier? You know, the ones that insta-murder you? What if on top of them being already difficult to kill, they could teleport, shoot invisible bullets, shoot completely through rocks, and then despawn all before you knew what happened? Then, imagine fighting one of those enemies for, let's say, 30 minutes on Grandmaster 3 and being dead right at the end as you killed it and getting no loot whatsoever. Oh, you don't have to. That happened with me and a GM3 Ash Titan that decided to be a Diglett and dunk on me from a waterfall. Yeah, it may be funny the first time you see them, like the first time you see a flying Deathclaw in a Fallout game, but when they become regular occurrences, they start to really get in the way of gameplay that you really want to enjoy. Then there's the 95% loading bugs, cutscene bugs, NPCs not loading in, talking to an NPC and crashing. All the fun things I enjoyed about this game got so muddled by this. Thankfully, I can tell you that many of these issues were taken care of literally the day that I'm recording all of this for you. There are still bugs here and there, but the playable experience has gotten significantly better. We'll still have to wait and see, though, if this will be the pattern of patches we'll see going forward with the rest of this game's content cycle. At this point, maybe you're asking yourself, should I buy Anthem? Well, the answer for me right now is twofold. BioWare has produced a solid, enjoyable gameplay foundation, only to sabotage it with an amalgamation of bugs and flawed, frustrating systems on the Origin Premier launch. While the Day 1 patch fixed plenty of these issues, it is unclear what the state of the game will be in 2 months from now, let alone 6. I will say, they've had a strong presence in their community with responses on Twitter, Reddit, and their own forums, and I do have hopes that they'll work on it and continue to make it right. So, if you have the patience to deal with yet another incredibly rocky looter shooter launch that promises to be better, then I'd say Anthem might be for you. If you're more burnt out like me, and you lack the tolerance nowadays of having to always say this game will be better in a handful of months, it's going to take a lot more than a few patched holes and a fresh coat of paint to make this house feel like a home to you. Thanks for watching.